They say money talks, but in my experience, real wealth whispers. And then it waits. Welcome back to Revenge Addict. Grab a snack, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Before we dive in, do me a quick favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. It costs you nothing and means everything to this channel. Thank you. Now let me tell you about the 7 years I spent playing poor so a family of arrogant frauds could destroy themselves. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 34 years old, and I live in Richmond, Virginia. At least that is where I used to live before everything changed. By day, I worked as a data analyst for a mid-sized logistics company. That was my cover. My real job, the one nobody knew about, was managing a private investment fund worth about $400 million. My grandfather started it. My father grew it. And by the time I turned 25, I was the one calling the shots. But you would never know it looking at me. I drove a 5-year-old Honda. I bought my clothes at outlet malls. I clipped coupons on Sunday mornings while drinking coffee from a chipped mug I had owned since college. I liked it that way. Money that screams is money that gets stolen. Money that whispers buys entire city blocks while nobody is watching. I met Sterling Thorne at a charity gala I was not supposed to attend. My father had bought a table and then caught the flu, so he sent me as his plus one. Sterling spotted me standing near the shrimp display, alone, wearing a dress I had borrowed from a friend. He walked over with the kind of confidence that only comes from having a father who bails you out of every bad decision. Sterling looked like a cologne advertisement that had been left in the sun too long. Tan, sharp jaw, perfect teeth, and absolutely nothing interesting behind his eyes. He asked me what I did for a living. I told him I was a data analyst. He said, and I quote, "That sounds adorable. You probably work really hard." I should have walked away right then. But there was something about the way he looked down at me, like I was a stray cat he might consider keeping, that made me want to see how deep the stupidity went. That is my fatal flaw. I am curious about bad people. I want to know exactly how bad they are willing to get. We dated for 11 months. Sterling never asked about my family. He never asked about my savings. He assumed that a data analyst who drove a Honda had nothing worth discussing. I let him assume that. There is a specific kind of freedom in being underestimated. You can watch people show you exactly who they are because they do not think you matter enough to hide it. Sterling introduced me to his parents 6 months in. Preston and Regina Thorne lived in a mansion that looked like someone had won a lottery and then lost a fight with a marble salesman. Everything was gold or white or mirrored. The chandelier in the foyer was bigger than my first apartment. Preston shook my hand with both of his, which is a move I have learned to watch for. The double-handed shake means either you are deeply sincere or you are deeply calculating. Preston Thorne had never been sincere a day in his life. He was a real estate developer who had made his fortune during the 2008 crash by buying up foreclosed homes from desperate families and renting them back at triple the mortgage. He was nouveau rich in the worst sense. He had money but no class, power but no grace, and a son who was a slightly dumber copy of himself. Regina looked at me like I had tracked mud onto her floor. She asked where I went to college. I told her I went to the University of Richmond. She said, "Oh. Public school? University of Richmond is private," but I did not correct her. She asked what my father did. I told her he was retired. She asked what he had retired from. I said he had worked in finance. She sniffed and said, "So he was someone's assistant." I smiled and said nothing. Let me teach you something about people like Regina Thorne. They will tell you exactly what they think of you within the first 10 minutes. The trick is to listen without flinching. They want to see you flinch. They want you to defend yourself, to prove you belong, to list your accomplishments like a child showing off report cards. When you do not flinch, it confuses them. They do not know what to do with someone who refuses to perform. Sterling proposed 6 months later. He did it at a restaurant in front of maybe 40 people. He got down on one knee and said I was the most acceptable woman he had ever dated. I said yes. Not because I loved him. I did not love him. I was curious about him, the way you are curious about a car crash you see from a distance. But I also knew something Sterling did not know. The Thorne family business was failing. I had been watching their real estate portfolio for years because my father had considered buying some of their debt. Their numbers were a disaster. They had over-leveraged on commercial properties right before remote work crushed the office market. They were bleeding cash. They had taken out bridge loans at predatory rates. And the only reason they had not gone bankrupt yet was because an anonymous investment vehicle had been quietly buying up their bad debt and extending their payment deadlines. That anonymous investment vehicle was me. I had been keeping the Thorne empire alive for 2 years before I even met Sterling. He had no idea. None of them had any idea. The wedding was small by Thorne standards, which meant only 200 guests. I wore a dress my mother had worn in 1987. Regina tried to throw it away the night before. She said it looked sad and yellowed. I found it in a garbage bag on the curb and put it back in my closet without saying a word. Sterling did not notice. He was too busy arguing with the band about their song list. We moved into a house that Preston owned, a 6-bedroom colonial in a gated community. Sterling told me to quit my job. I said no. He said it was embarrassing that his wife worked as a spreadsheet girl. I said I liked spreadsheets. He called me difficult. I said thank you. That was the pattern of our marriage. Sterling would demand something. I would politely refuse. He would sulk. I would go back to my home office and log into my anonymous trading accounts. And somewhere across town, a family of arrogant millionaires had no idea that the wife they treated like hired help was the only thing standing between them and total ruin. The first year was tolerable. The second year was harder. By the third year, the Thorne family had decided I was fair game for public humiliation. It started small. Regina would correct my grammar at dinner parties. She would say things like, Eleanor means casserole, not entree, when I used the wrong word. Preston would ask me to fetch things for him, coats and drinks and napkins, like I was a waitress. Sterling never defended me. He laughed along. He told me I was being too sensitive. He said his family was just playful. There is a specific kind of cruelty that hides behind the word playful. It is the cruelty that knows exactly what it is doing, but has convinced itself that laughter makes it harmless. I want to pause here and tell you why I stayed. It was not love. It was not fear. It was patience. I am a very patient person. My grandfather used to say that revenge is a meal best served at a temperature you do not mind waiting for. I was waiting. I was watching. And I was learning exactly how much rope the Thorne family needed to hang themselves. The answer was a lot. They needed a lot of rope, so I kept giving it to them. The only decent person in that entire family was Sterling's older brother, Marcus. Marcus was a trauma surgeon at the county hospital. He was also the only Thorne who had never made a racist comment, never looked down on a waiter, never treated me like furniture. He was married to a woman named Brittany, who was blonde and loud, and spent most of her time posting inspirational quotes on social media while being quietly terrible to everyone in her orbit. Marcus and Brittany had a son named Elijah, who was 7 years old and already reading at a 12th grade level. The Thorne family treated Marcus like a disappointment because he had chosen medicine over real estate. They treated Elijah like a curiosity because his skin was darker than theirs. Marcus was black. The Thorne family had never quite forgiven him for that, even though Preston had married Regina, who was also black. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. But that is the thing about bigots. They always think they are the exception. The flashback that matters happened 2 years into my marriage. I was sitting in Marcus's home office while he finished some paperwork. Elijah was doing a puzzle on the floor. Marcus looked up at me and said, "You know they are never going to accept you, right?" I said I knew. He said, "Then why do you stay?" I thought about telling him the truth. I thought about telling him about the anonymous investment fund and the debt I was holding and the quiet little trap I had been building since before I even met his brother. But I did not. Instead, I said, because sometimes the best way to watch a house burn is from inside the living room. Marcus laughed. Then he got very serious and said, "Whatever you are planning, just make sure Elijah is not in the blast radius." I promised him Elijah would be fine. That promise mattered more to me than anything else. The 4th year of my marriage was when things got truly ugly. Sterling started drinking more. He had always been a social drinker, but now he was drinking alone. He would come home at midnight, reeking of whiskey, and pick fights about nothing. He accused me of hiding money. He said I must have a secret bank account because there was no way I was living on a data analyst salary without complaining. I told him I was good at budgeting. He called me a liar. Then he grabbed my wrist, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to make a point. I looked at his hand on my arm and I felt something inside me go very cold and very still. That was the moment I stopped being patient and started being surgical. I did not leave. I did not cry. I went to my home office and I pulled up the Thorne family's financial records and I started planning their funeral. The 5th year, Sterling lost his temper in front of his parents for the first time. We were at Sunday dinner. Regina had made a comment about my little job and how it was cute that I pretended to contribute. I smiled and said nothing. Sterling slammed his fist on the table and said, "Why do you let her talk to you like that? "You are such a doormat. It is embarrassing." I looked at him and said, "Would you like me to defend myself?" He said yes. I turned to Regina and said, "Your son has lost $3 million on bad crypto investments in the last year alone. Would you like to discuss contributions?" The table went silent. Sterling turned purple. Regina looked like she had swallowed a live fish. Preston just stared at me with something that was almost respect. Sterling grabbed my arm under the table and squeezed so hard I felt my fingers go numb. He whispered, "We are talking about this when we get home." We did not talk about it when we got home. He screamed at me for 2 hours. I sat on the couch and watched his face turn red and thought about compound interest. A patient investment always pays off. The decent in-law subplot needs explaining here. Marcus had been trying to divorce Brittany for 3 years. She was emotionally abusive to Elijah. She told him he was too smart for his own good and needed to learn how to be normal. She threw away his science fair project because it was taking up space. Marcus had filed for divorce twice, and both times, Preston had threatened to cut him off from the family trust if he went through with it. Marcus did not care about the money. He cared about Elijah. And Preston had made it clear that if Marcus left Brittany, Preston would use his lawyers to fight for custody on Brittany's behalf. A grandfather suing for custody of his own grandson just to punish his son for getting a divorce. That is the level of petty we are dealing with. I knew about all of this because Marcus told me. He cried in my kitchen one night while Elijah slept on my couch. He said, "I cannot win, they have all the money and all the lawyers." I poured him a glass of wine and said, "Not all the money." He looked at me funny. I changed the subject. The 6th year was the quiet year. I stopped fighting back. I stopped defending myself. I let Regina call me stupid. I let Preston treat me like a servant. I let Sterling grab my arm and push my shoulder and speak to me like I was a child who had disappointed him. I collected every moment like a receipt. I saved texts. I recorded conversations. I documented every bruise, every insult, every time someone in that family said something racist about Marcus or Elijah. I built a file so thick it could have been used as a doorstop. And all the while, I was tightening the financial noose. I called in favors from other lenders. I accelerated payment schedules on the Thorn debt. I made sure that every single one of their properties was leveraged to the absolute maximum. They did not know it yet, but they were already bankrupt. They just had not stopped spending long enough to notice. The 7th year was the anniversary gala. Preston decided to throw a 10-year anniversary party for himself and Regina, even though it was actually their 9th anniversary. He said 9 sounds cheap. That should tell you everything about Preston Thorn. The gala was held at the country club, 300 guests, champagne fountains, a live band. Everyone who was anyone in Richmond real estate attended. I wore a blue dress I had bought at a consignment shop for $40. Regina wore a gown that cost more than my car. Sterling had been drinking since noon. I could smell it on him when he helped me out of the car. His hand lingered on my lower back a little too long, squeezed a little too hard. He leaned down and whispered, "Do not embarrass me tonight." I smiled and said, "I would never." The first 3 hours were a nightmare. Regina made a toast where she said, "I am so grateful for my son Sterling, who married beneath himself out of the kindness of his heart." People laughed. I raised my glass and smiled. Preston pulled me aside and told me to refill the ice buckets. I refilled the ice buckets. A woman I had never met asked if I was the help. I said I was the daughter-in-law. She said, "Oh, how unfortunate for you." I smiled. Sterling was across the room, laughing with his college friends, not looking at me. That was fine. I was not there for him. I was there to watch. Then came the speeches. Preston stood up at the head table with a microphone and a glass of scotch. He started talking about family and loyalty and how some people marry up and some people marry way down. He looked directly at me when he said it. The crowd laughed. He said, "But we love our Eleanor anyway. She is like a rescue dog. You know she came from somewhere sad, but she is trying her best." More laughter. Sterling was laughing. Regina was laughing. I was not laughing. I was calculating. I stood up from my seat. The room went a little quieter. Sterling grabbed my wrist and said, "Sit down." I did not sit down. I pulled my hand away and said, "I would like to say something." Preston waved his hand like he was shooing a fly. "Go ahead, Eleanor. Keep it short. We have real toasts to get to." I walked to the head table and took the microphone from his hand. I looked out at 300 people who had spent 7 years laughing at me, and I said, "For 7 years, I have watched this family lie, cheat, and steal their way through life. They have treated me like garbage because they thought I had nothing. They treated my brother-in-law like an outcast because he chose healing over profit. They treated their own grandson like a problem because his intelligence made them uncomfortable. And through all of it, I have been quiet. I have been patient. I have been the doormat you wipe your feet on. Sterling stood up. His face was red. He walked toward me with his hand raised. I did not move. I looked him in the eye and said, "Do not." He did it anyway. He slapped me across the face so hard that I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a shriek of feedback. The room went completely silent for 1 second. Then someone laughed. Then someone else laughed. Then the whole room erupted in laughter. They thought it was part of the show. They thought Sterling was being funny. They thought I deserved it. I stood there with my hand on my cheek and felt the heat spreading across my skin. Sterling was smiling. He thought he had won. He thought he had put me in my place. I wiped a tear from my eye, not because I was sad, because I was done waiting. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had programmed for this exact moment. My father answered on the first ring. I said, "Dad, please come and destroy them." Then I hung up and looked at Sterling. I said, "You should have stopped at the ice buckets. If you have made it this far, do me a quick favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. It costs you nothing and means everything to this channel. Thank you." The room did not know what to do. People were still laughing, but now they were looking at me with confusion. Sterling grabbed my arm again and said, "We are leaving, now." I pulled away and said, "No, we are not. We are going to sit down and wait. Your father is about to get a very interesting phone call." Preston was already on his phone. His face had gone from red to white to gray. He was talking fast and low. Regina was tugging at his sleeve, asking what was wrong. He pushed her hand away, then his phone rang again, and again, and again. I sat down at the head table and poured myself a glass of champagne. I took a sip. It was the best champagne I had ever tasted. 20 minutes later, my father walked into the country club. He was wearing a gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He looked like a banker who had come to collect a very large debt, which was exactly what he was. Behind him were 2 lawyers and a private investigator I had hired 3 years ago. My father walked straight to the head table, ignored Sterling completely, and kissed me on the forehead. He said, "Are you okay?" I showed him my cheek. He looked at Sterling with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was not anger. It was something colder. It was the look of a man who had just decided to erase another human being from existence. My father opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. He handed one to Preston. He said, "As of 15 minutes ago, every loan, every line of credit, and every financial instrument held by Thorn Real Estate Holdings has been called due in full. You have 72 hours to pay approximately $47 million. If you fail to pay, the court will begin foreclosure proceedings on all of your properties, including your personal residence, your investment properties, and the commercial buildings that generate your only remaining income." Preston's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He said, "Who are you?" My father said, "I am Eleanor's father, and I am the managing partner of the investment fund that has been quietly buying your debt for the last 5 years. My daughter has been keeping you afloat while you mocked her. And now she has decided to stop." Sterling grabbed the document from his father's hand. He read it. His face went from red to white to gray, just like his father's. He looked at me and said, "You cannot do this." I said, "I already did it. The paperwork has been filed. The notices have been sent. Your family is bankrupt, Sterling. You just did not know it until now." He said, "But we have lawyers." I said, "So do I better ones, and they have been preparing for this moment for 3 years." Regina started crying. Not sad crying, angry crying. She pointed at me and screamed, "You are nothing. You are a nobody. You cannot take everything from us." I stood up and walked over to her. I leaned in close and said, "I am not a nobody. I am a Vance. My grandfather founded the first black-owned investment bank in Virginia. My grandmother was on the board of the Federal Reserve. I have more money in my personal checking account than your entire family has in net worth. You thought I was poor because I drove a Honda. I drove a Honda because I do not need a fancy car to feel important." Regina stopped crying. She just stared at me. I think that was the moment she finally understood how wrong she had been. Preston tried to negotiate. He offered to give me a seat on the board. He offered to make me a partner. He offered to rename a building after me. I said no to all of it. He said, "What do you want?" I said, "I want you to remember this feeling. I want you to remember the night you laughed at me and my husband hit me and you thought it was funny. I want you to remember that feeling every time you lose something you love." Then I turned to Marcus, who had been standing at the back of the room with Elijah in his arms. I walked over to him and said, "I told you Elijah would not be in the blast radius." Marcus hugged me. He was crying. Elijah was crying. I was not crying. I was done crying over the Thorne family. The fallout took about 6 weeks. The Thorne family lost everything. The mansion went to auction. The cars were repossessed. The country club membership was revoked. Preston tried to file for bankruptcy, but my lawyers had structured the debt in a way that made it non-dischargeable. He owed the money until he paid it or died. He would never pay it. He died 3 years later, broke and bitter, in a rental house that had mold in the walls. Regina moved in with her sister in Florida. I heard she spends her days writing angry emails to people who do not respond. Sterling tried to fight the divorce. He hired 3 different lawyers. All 3 quit when they saw my evidence. The recordings, the texts, the photographs of the bruises. The judge granted me a restraining order and a settlement that included everything Sterling had left, which was nothing. He lives in a studio apartment now and works as a car salesman. I know this because one of my viewers sent me a picture of him standing next to a used sedan with a smile that does not reach his eyes. But the best part, the part that still makes me smile when I think about it, is what happened to Marcus. He finally divorced Brittany. With the Thorne fortune gone, Preston had no money to fund a custody battle. Marcus won full custody of Elijah in a hearing that lasted less than an hour. The judge cited Brittany's history of emotional abuse and her refusal to support Elijah's education. Brittany tried to appeal. She lost. Marcus and Elijah moved into a small house near the hospital. Marcus kept working as a trauma surgeon. Elijah went to a private school for gifted children. I paid for it. Marcus tried to refuse. I told him it was not charity. I told him it was back pay for being the only decent person in that family. He cried again. Men in that family cried a lot around me. I did not mind. Crying meant they were finally feeling something real. I live in a penthouse downtown now. My father and I run the investment fund together. I still drive a Honda. Some habits are hard to break. I still clip coupons on Sunday mornings. I still drink coffee from that chipped mug. But now when people ask me what I do, I tell them the truth. I tell them I am a data analyst. And then I watch their faces to see if they are smart enough to laugh. Here is the twist you did not see coming. Marcus knew. He knew the whole time. He figured it out in year 3 when he saw my financial modeling software open on my laptop while I was making him tea. He never said anything. He never asked for anything. He just waited. And when I finally blew everything up, he was standing at the back of the room not because he happened to be there, but because I had texted him the night before and told him to bring Elijah and be ready. He said, "I have been ready for 7 years." That is why I paid for Elijah's school. That is why I bought Marcus's house. He was not just the decent in-law. He was my co-conspirator, and he never once asked for credit. If you enjoyed this story, you are officially a revenge addict. Before you go, do me a quick favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. It costs you nothing and means everything to this channel. Thank you.